This is Conversations on Careers and Professional Life, a podcast from the Foster School of Business, MBA Career Management Office. I'm your host, Gregory Heller. On each episode, I talk with guests from faculty and staff to students, alumni, and business leaders about the skills and strategies that can help you design a professional career that you're happy with. My guest today is my good friend, Gabriel Sheer. Gabriel and I have known each other for a while and worked together at a local startup about a decade ago. I wanted to have him on the podcast to talk about the climate and clean tech startup space. Gabriel is the Clean Energy and Mobility Portfolio Manager for Elemental Accelerator, a nonprofit venture accelerator that funds early-stage startups tackling the climate crisis. Gabriel recently spoke on a panel at the Seattle ClimateTech series with two other venture capital investors about the state of the market. Given the recent layoffs in big tech companies, we're recording this in February of 2023, I thought it would be a great time to get Gabriel's perspective on employment opportunities in the climate solutions space. Gabriel, welcome to Conversations on Careers and Professional Life.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I think you have a pretty interesting window into what is sort of coming down the pipeline in terms of interesting companies that are hopefully about to explode in growth in a good way, and perhaps have more staffing needs. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about the kind of companies in your portfolio, what stage they're at, and we'll take it from there.
Happy to. I think just starting off, looking at our portfolio, we have about 150 companies in the portfolio. And so those represent companies that have been a part of the accelerator across now 13 years or so. The reality, thusly, of that is that some of them are very young, small startups with, 3 to 5 to 10 people. Others have gone public or exited another way. And then there are a lot of companies in between. So we have, tremendous variety across that 150. I guess in the energy and mobility side specifically, we've got about 80 companies that we're working with actively. And again, some of those have exited, some of those are a little later stage, and some of them are much earlier stage. So we're seeing a lot of activity. We're seeing a lot of opportunity for growth in climate tech, and really excited about what we're seeing.
Are you starting to see the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed in 2022 by the U.S. Congress?
Yes. Yeah. Huge action taking place around not just IRA, but also the IIJA and the CHIPS Act, the kind of the three stool legs, if you will, of what the federal government's doing right now in a whole lot of areas, economic, industrial policy, but also climate related. And I think some of the things we're seeing are a really quick rollout of a lot of interesting programs and a very aggressive search for new technologies as well as existing technologies ready for scaling. The federal government clearly sees an opportunity and a role for entrepreneurs and innovation and startups to solve a lot of really big problems. I think one of the things that's really exciting about all of this is that this is putting a huge impetus behind what is also happening on the VC side of things, which is there's a tremendous amount of venture capital dollars flowing into climate tech as well, both here and in Europe and in other places. And so the combination of federal government support in the US plus venture capital dollars and other investing dollars is really just putting a massive amount of energy into lots of new companies, lots of new technologies, and ultimately to kind of get back to the center of a lot of this conversation, jobs, right? New jobs for people and new opportunities for people. And I'll just add a quick flag on that. I think there are lots of jobs coming in those spaces, climate tech companies and climate tech solutions. But I think there are also going to be a lot of jobs created on the opposite side, which is to say working in government, working in NGOs and civil society, trying to be the flip side, the sort of corollary to all these new technologies, helping figure out how to regulate them, how to permit them, how they fit into society's greater needs. So really exciting times, I think, from a job creation front. And a lot of that does tie to the IRA, the IIJA, and CHIPS.
So Elemental Accelerator has a jobs board, and last time I looked, there were 950 open positions on that jobs board.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of them are back-end developer, front-end developer, highly technical engineering style jobs. Where do you see, or what stage are the companies that are hiring for more of the business roles, finance, product marketing, product management, strategy, corporate development, business development, and those sorts of things?
Like with any startup, I think there's a bit of a walk and chew gum kind of aspect to where every company needs to be trying to do a lot of this at the same time. Your last question, we're talking about the federal side of things and the various stimulus funds that are coming in through the IRA and so forth. That's going to create a walk, run, race all at once kind of impetus for these companies, where on the one hand, they have to get product to market, they have to commercialize, they have to figure out how to do this at some level of scale. On the other hand, figuring out how to engage with government right now is a really, really important thing, right? Because there are a lot of funds coming out where a startup might be eligible for them. But to do that, they're going to have either somebody dedicated to government relations and policy, or their leadership is going to have to be doing that. And that all ties to the sort of commercial and the sort of business side opportunities. I think also as these companies are growing quickly, there's sort of the societal need, the impetus, from a global perspective to solve climate or to at least try to mitigate it. There's also the business drivers. And so all of this points to we need business people who know how to build these companies. In particular, when you have young technologies, maybe coming out of a lab or in very nascent stages, these are companies where the smart founders will quickly identify a need for business drivers. And I think in Seattle, we're seeing that in particular. There's so much energy coming out of whether it's the University of Washington or other places around the science and technology side. We need business people to complement that and really grow these companies. It's also one of the areas where you mentioned the layoffs in your intro. I think is really hopeful that we have some people who are maybe coming out of some of these big companies. They know how to run complicated big programs, whether it's product development or otherwise, and they can bring that expertise and that leadership to some of these startups.
What advice do you have for someone who's seeking a job in the climate solutions space?
I think, the advice I would give them is much the same as the advice you give on this podcast pretty regularly for anyone looking for work, which is, figure out the areas that interest you, do a lot of informational interviewing, talk to people, read, learn. And as you find yourself going down a rabbit hole and getting fascinated by something, dig deeper and find a space where your skill set and your interests align. I have done that a lot over my career, just talking to people and figuring out what they're doing. And, some conversations you have with people who have a startup or an idea or a business, you're like, yeah, that's, kind of interesting. I'm glad you're doing it, but it doesn't drive me. And then some, at least for me, I find my gut really attracting to like, oh, that idea, I want to follow that. Or that founder, I'm really excited about that founder. I think your vision aligns with mine. Your, where you want to go aligns with mine. So I think a lot of it's, building out your network of people. And I don't mean that transactionally. I mean, the people and the people from whom you can learn will give you ideas. They will seed your sort of sense of motivation and ambition, or at least for me, they do. And then dive deep, read, listen, learn, see what's out there and kind of follow that. And then if you're sort of struggling for the where, you don't know who in your network or who might be a part of, climate tech generally, there are lots and lots of increasing numbers of resources. So whether it's Work on Climate in their Slack channel, there are variations of that all over the world now of people who are really trying to move the needle and tying together in various, again, Slack channels and others. There are networking events. You mentioned here in Seattle, the Seattle ClimateTech meetup that we helped organize last week. But there are meetups happening all over the place with people trying to move the needle on climate tech. So I think find the people who are doing the things that interest you, talk to them, learn from them, and ultimately that often leads to opportunity.
And you mentioned Work on Climate. That's workonclimate.org. We'll, of course, put these in the show notes. Along with some others. I feel like every week on LinkedIn, I see another climate jobs board. I just sent you one yesterday that I saw. I've aggregated a bunch of links to resources for job seekers looking for positions in climate solutions on conversationsoncareers.com. So you can head over there to find all those resources in the show notes. You mentioned read and listen. Are there particular newsletters or websites that you pay a lot of attention to see which companies look like they're doing really well or which industries are really getting the wind behind their sails, or podcasts that you listen to other than mine?
Yeah, I think, again, with this too, there are so many resources and the number just increased. You've got kind of mainstream, or I would say more mainstream sources like Canary Media, for example. It's a great source for deep dive, work on climate. My Climate Journey is another one that's both a great podcast and newsletter. CTVC, which is ctvc.co, they're a really solid source for information. I tend to read and listen to as much as I possibly can. And I would say even some of the mainstream media is picking up more and more of these stories. I think because both there's policy drivers, money is pouring into it. There's increasing awareness that climate is a really big problem that we've really got to address and engage with. So I think, I'm seeing it more and more across all sorts of sources, but I guess those are some of them. My Climate Journey, as I mentioned, CTVC, these are some of the sources I think I find a lot of value in. And then I would also highlight for folks, you asked about sort of how do you find, and to me, it's that passion piece of what do I care about. For some people, I think it's solving problems generally is sufficient. And I'm a product manager. I just want to build a product. That's great. For others, they need that passion of like, I'm really drawn to, for example, food and agriculture, or I'm really drawn to carbon capture, or I'm really drawn to mobility or transportation. And for those folks, I would recommend finding the newsletters that really capture those subject matters or those things in the subject matter that you care about. So, for example, I follow a lot of different micromobility, mobility, transportation related things because that's one of the two portfolio sides that I manage. The other side is energy. So I follow a number of newsletters and podcasts that are deep dives into specific topics on energy. For example, I listen to one podcast that's just about nuclear and try to get my head around what's happening in that space. And, you can't know everything. You have to step back. And sometimes it's better to step back and not even try. But I do think if you've got a passion for a particular category of idea that you're trying to solve, again, maybe it's food and agriculture. So go deep on that. Find the newsletters, find the things that are interesting.
Let's talk about Seattle specifically. So your venture accelerator is not a Seattle specific accelerator. It is global, but you have been here for quite a while. What do you see as Seattle's sort of special sauce, competitive advantage, or which industries really are focusing and aggregating here in the Western Washington?
I think that our secret sauce, such as it were, is we have a few key components of what makes a really great ecosystem. One, we've got amazing talent, incredible people who have moved here over many, many decades, whether it was Boeing years ago or now more recently, I guess Microsoft's less recent, but Amazon, all the amazing tech startups that have brought so many incredible brains to the Northwest. That's one piece. Two, obviously, many of those no longer little startups, Microsoft and Amazon come to mind, have minted many millionaires and others who have resources that they can and should pour into solving some of these big societal challenges. Three, we have an amazing environment naturally. If you look around, there are lots of inspiring reasons to care about the planet, and we're seeing those changes that everybody's seeing hitting those resources as well, whether it's the heat dome of a couple of years ago that left cedar trees all over the Northwest with browned and reddened tips, or the things that are happening weather-wise that just aren't quite like they used to be. There are reasons to remind us that we need to work on some of these problems. So I think, again, our secret sauce, we've got amazing companies, amazing brains. The UW obviously turns out more and more of those every year. We've got resources and we've got a reason to care. And so I think those are kind of the big things that to me are drivers. One of the things I think is exciting to see, you asked about industries converging here, is I think there is a upswing in nuclear-related industry action here. I also think that there is battery action happening, and particularly Group 14 is one of the more interesting companies I've been watching that has raised just boatloads of money, but also seems like they're on track of something really, truly transformative for battery technology. So there's some exciting clustering happening around, again, sort of nuclear and batteries. I think there's so much opportunity for more. Again, we have so many brilliant people here. We've got the resources. We've got a natural environment that's calling for help. I think there's so much opportunity to do more here.
If you were going to look ahead into your crystal ball 12 to 18 months out, how do you think that might change?
How do I think which piece may change?
Do you think that there's something right over the horizon that is going to get more attention, where there's going to be more growth, or where that cluster is really going to come together?
I would say a number of us are working on it. There are a lot of folks trying to put energy into it. And I'd count you among those, where we've got this amazing research institution in the form of the UW. And there are people there trying to figure out, how do we tie this all together? How do we do, in many ways what Stanford has done around commercialization, around spilling out lots of these startup ideas into actual companies, and tie that to some of the people who have left tech in recent years, the big tech side of things. You've got obviously the recent layoffs, but also people who have chosen to leave. There's lots of entrepreneurial activity. And I think, again, there's a screaming demand for some of these solutions. And back to the beginning of our conversation, the IRA and so forth have given federal impetus to, and sort of federal spotlight to, the need for some of these solutions as well. So yeah, I think 12 to 18 months out, we're looking at a lot of growth in a lot of opportunities. I would love to see Seattle on the global map as a leader in climate tech, clean tech, justice, environmental justice coming from here. And I think the values in which this community is rooted in a lot of ways lend themselves to that. We have a very deeply environmentally inclined community. We've got a community who cares a lot about social justice, and those things tie together very strongly in this movement. And I'm hopeful that we'll see a lot of really interesting companies spinning out of Seattle in the next, to your framework, I guess, 12 to 18 months and beyond.
Other than the kind of hustle that's necessary to succeed in a startup, are there other competencies or knowledge or skills that you think are really critical for people who want to work in the climate solutions space?
I guess generally speaking, it's like any other startup, any other company. You need business sense. And that's one of the things that's come up a lot in the last couple of years with the crazy gyrations of the market, where one minute we've got tons of capital flowing in and the next minute it's freezing up. Is at the end of the day, if you're building a fundamentally sound business that has, it's solving a problem and has an approach or a solution or a technology that solves a real problem for people, I think often you'll do well. And that kind of is true across cycles and all sorts of things. Obviously, there is luck, there's timing. A lot of VCs are not focusing on new investments as much as they are on supporting their existing portfolios right now due to the uncertainty in the market. So yeah, having access to resources is a key piece of things, but I think building a fundamentally sound business is at the core of all of this. That said, I think dig deep on knowledge on all sorts of stuff, right? Understand the market you're trying to solve for. Understand the people who will be necessary, the communities into which you'll launch your product or your service or your technology. Understand what they really need and try to engage them earlier the better. We specialize at Elemental in project-based work. And in particular, we look at the frontline communities in many cases who are being hit first and worst by climate and try to think about how do the products, services, technologies that we're bringing into the world, or supporting rather, how do those engage with these communities and with these people, and really try to be aware of and engaged with the communities that we're trying to serve. And I think that's a key piece of things. One other thing I'll flag in particular, I mentioned earlier, the justice side of things. The federal government obviously is putting a lot of impetus into not just the tech side, but the people side of things. There's I'd say a significant focus on disadvantaged communities in the last round of federal policy actions. And if you look at just the IRA alone, I think it's something like $60 billion is being, focused on companies that are serving low and middle income populations. And so I think any company that's thinking about who they're trying to serve, think about the broader community. One of the ways that tech has been, I think, maligned over the last decade or two has been a focus on solving problems that most people don't have. I'm a rich 20-something techie living in San Francisco. This is my problem, but that's not a problem that all of us face. And I think this is an opportunity to reset that narrative a bit and to think about how do we serve everybody, or at least many, many more people.
So you mentioned that a lot of VCs are sort of doubling down on their current portfolio of companies. What are some of the indicators, if someone's looking at startups that they want to work for, what are some of the indicators that you would say point to a startup that is healthy, that has the runway, that is a good place perhaps to start the next chapter of your career?
That's a good question. I often follow my gut. I follow my gut on people and I follow my gut on ideas. And so for me, one of the foremost things is, do I feel like I can follow these people that I'm looking at joining into really challenging times? Because no matter what, you're going to get really challenging times in a startup. I was fortunate to be on the founding team of a startup that grew really, really fast. We we were blitzscaling. And when I met our founders, I was just right away taken with the vision and with what we were trying to do, and felt totally a connection with them and with our vision. And I think for me, that was key because, we had really high highs. We were up, we raised another round. We're growing this fast. We just opened this market. And then we had really low lows of like, oh boy, things aren't looking so good. How are we going to survive? And you got to have a team you can trust to get through that, a team that's focused on the mission and really committed to each other and to what you're trying to build. And so I think that's touchy-feely or non-tangible in the sense of how do you go find that? But I think feeling like you could really throw yourself at something. If you're in a startup, it's ups and downs every couple minutes, every couple days. And you got to have people that you feel like you can go at that with. You can ask for more technical things like, let's see your cap table, who's invested in you. And, it's always great if they've got a bigger bank account and some really solid investors on the cap table. But we've all seen FTX being a recent example of where even really big, smart investors can make really big, stupid mistakes. So, there's no guarantee, and the market will be what it will be. The technology may or may not play out the way you think it will. Communities may not want what you're selling. The, VC dollars may dry up. You're going to have lots and lots of challenges. So I think at the end of the day, a lot of it's about people. Do I want to go through really hard times with these people? Do I feel bought in enough to this vision that I'll throw everything at it and then throw a little more because we've got to go harder and faster? And for me, that's mostly worked out, but it's certainly been kind of the front of my mind when I've thought about joining a company. And it's what we look for, and as I'm recruiting and talking with executives for our next portfolio, it's what we're looking for is people who are so committed to the cause and who are committed to doing so in a humane and just way, but also in a endlessly persistent way.
I think we'll leave it there. I appreciate your time, Gabriel. Be sure to check out the show notes at conversationsoncareers.com, where we will post links to many of the resources we discussed and probably more. Thank you for having this conversation on careers and professional life.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me. And I'll just do a quick plug. Elemental, as you noted earlier, is a ClimateTech Accelerator with a particular focus on traditionally excluded founders. We'll be opening our application cycle for this 2023 application period on the 21st of February. And so hoping to find some really exciting companies, and would encourage your listeners to look at those companies, and if they've got a company, to apply. Thanks, Gregory. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you for listening to Conversations on Careers and Professional Life. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or classmate. Help others find the show by leaving a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Conversations on Careers and Professional Life is produced by me, Gregory Heller, with support from the Foster School of Business, Office of MBA Career Management. Learn more about the show, find show notes and past episodes, and get in touch with me at conversationsoncareers.com.